Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 548, written by PiEqualsThree, The Theft of My Thoughts. I've been trying to explore my philosophical and spiritual side for the past couple of months, but ever since then, weird crap keeps happening to me. What you might call glitches or synchronicities. It became so overwhelming, I seriously thought I was self-inducing mania, hypnosis, or hallucinations. To combat this, I have tried to develop a stronger attention to what I do and think. For example, how my train of thoughts, actions, and memories may have overlapped to result in a cognitive bias and error, as well as any scientific and logical explanations. And 99% of the time, this is usually where the ruminations of glitches end up. But what happened recently defied everything I can think of. I was in the city center on my way home and saw a mature couple as they were leaving a bar. As I walked past, I heard the waitress bid them farewell in Dutch, but the guy mocked her voice and what she said to his girlfriend. From behind, I heard them all laugh and the couple walked, continuing their conversation. It was obviously nothing to worry about, but I thought to myself, that wasn't very nice. As if I would ever have the balls to say something so weak and reactionary about a non-issue to a confident guy in front of his girlfriend. All of a sudden, their conversation cut short. About 5 seconds later, he said, out loud in English, despite just speaking Dutch, "What do you mean that wasn't nice?" I thought it was yet another funny coincidence, and so as if I was continuing the conversation, I thought, it just wasn't. There was a few seconds of pause, and as if on cue, he said, even louder, "Tell me how that wasn't nice." Please keep in mind, I live in the Netherlands. Most Dutchies interject English while speaking Dutch, but this was different. He was having a full-on conversation with me. By this point, I was in disbelief. My instincts told me to slowly and calmly look back with just one eye just to make sure he was talking to his girlfriend and not reading my thoughts. And when I turned around, I was horrified. He and his girlfriend were looking straight at me, smiling as if they knew I was going to look. I slowly turned back around and kept walking, pretending like nothing happened. I was growing anxious, and so I took a deep, slow, and silent breath to calm down. I kept breathing in and out, slowly, convincing myself I was just imagining things when he said, "Exactly, you won't tell me," and then started laughing. I have no clue how to explain this. Maybe he just had a string of lucky guesses to just say out loud what I just happened to be thinking. Either way, this wasn't normal. Case notes, file number 548. As you say, it is conceivable this was a coincidence. Perhaps the couple saw you and, being more rambunctious and confrontational for its own sake, decided to pick on you, assuming what you had thought, a sort of self-awareness of their own jerkiness. Still, the fact they knew exactly what you were thinking is unnerving and also spoke in English, which you speak. My gut, though, tells me it was more than mere guesswork on their part. Who knows, really? Perhaps there are more people among us able to read thoughts. But I suspect if this is the case, it would be less of a direct transcription, like in the movie What Women Want with Mel Gibson. That would just be annoying at a certain point. No, it's probably more of an attuned instinct from their subconscious minds, picking up on your own mind's emissions. Bonus file, written by TomrummetsKald, The Possession of Anne. So, I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story, mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but also because it had severe personal implications for me. Anyway, I've decided to share it here, and I hope you understand why there are things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December 2020. As part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with this type of patient, so I was really excited about it. I switched around the 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with lots of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to a task, which meant I came across everything from murderers and pedophiles to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw literal crap at me, and all that stuff. So I like to think I'm a pretty tough guy. And besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button and staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards, I quickly noticed that there was a certain room which was monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because the patient is physically abusive, suicidal, or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague and she told me it was a female patient, let's just call her Anne, who was extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point, Anne had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I could not believe what I was hearing. We have really strict procedures when it comes to restraining people with belts. By the way, they're soft belts made of fabric, not leather. So restraining the patient really is the absolute last resort we go to. I asked the chief psychiatrist what was up with this girl, and he just scoffed and said, "If only I knew, but honestly, she defies logic." He told me that they first thought she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse, no matter how many different medications they tried. They thought she might have suffered a trauma and was in a dissociative state, but that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman in her 20s to being violent, extremely aggressive, and unable to speak in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs were involved. We regularly administer a toxicology check of all patients and always when they're admitted. One day, my alarm went off. They're all connected, so I know where I need to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne, and I was right. She had only had her legs and torso fixated. Again, normal procedure if the patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. It wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own filth at us. I had seen that loads of times. But the screams this woman made. It was the most primal, guttural, and terrifying sounds I have ever heard. It scared me, crapless. The best way I can describe it is something like a bear growling and a mountain lion hissing and spitting at the same time. I have seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could never have imagined that a person could make sounds like that. As an intern, I am no way allowed to use force, so I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues tried to fixate her fully on the bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Reminding you all, these are really experienced people. At last, we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her 1 and then a second shot. It only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection, she calmed enough so that they could restrain her. She never nodded off. She just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room, sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was a relatively calm weekend, so there really wasn't much to do. Anne was in one of her good periods, so she had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her, though. I was sitting in the office when suddenly I saw Anne walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if she had taken a bathroom break or whatever, but he wasn't around. So I catched up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone, but of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of Anne, and rightfully so, even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you. But when it keeps happening, that patient does catch some stigma. I, for one, always try to look at the person and not the illness, so I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read, book." I was completely taken aback by the fact she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. She then sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. She then cuddled up to me, put her head on my lap, and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by, and she looked absolutely shocked. And before I knew it, 5 or 6 people, including the chief psychiatrist, were looking at me reading this random book out to her. I caught a lot of praise for this, which is always nice. But then, things took a turn for the worse, for me at least. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you? But this was bigger, much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down, while nails or claws or whatever slid on the steps. I got up thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house, but there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living crap out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body, like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus, like tunnel vision, but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to disassociate. I had this feeling of being totally out of contact with my body. Then came the panic attacks. My girlfriend called an ambulance one of the times because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedic said I had a heart rate of 240 beats per minute. I have had no prior problems with my psyche, but I figured it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass with long arms and legs sitting in the top corner of our bedroom, like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago, I told my girlfriend about it. She kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're just about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you sort of smirk." That reminded me of Anne, and now I'm absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe it or not, that's up to you. I've never treated a patient like Anne, and none of my colleagues had either. It was scary stuff, properly. And I've never suffered any psychological problems before, never. But something is going on, I'm sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me or something. I don't know. And by the way, Anne is much better today. She is in a rehabilitating home where she thrives. One day, she might even be able to have her normal life back.